That's pretty awesome. Okay, so I guess we'll get started here. So thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Jessica. I'm Vice President and Communications Chair for the Alberta Horse Trials Association. And Kathleen Ziegler has put these online educational sessions together for us, which is awesome. And she's the chair of the high performance team. And we'd like to thank the Alberta Horse Trials Association for sponsoring these talks. And we're happy to have April Clay here to talk about performing under pressure. And I think we're good to turn it over to you, April, to introduce yourself and get into the presentation.
Great. Okay, I think so. Do you have to switch off your screen sharing before I can?
Yes, you should be good to go now.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, you're good.
Nope. All right. Perfect. Okay. So thanks, Jessica, and thanks to the AHTA and to Kathleen for having me back again. Oh, there we go. Okay. Video's on. I think everything's in place now.
Yeah, everything looks good.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for having me back. We had a good time last time, and I think this is definitely an issue that lots of people want to hear about, and it's certainly something that I remember from my competitive days. And just to give you a short introduction to who I am, for those of you that don't know, I started out as my first life, I say, was as a competitive rider. And then I went to school, became a psychologist, was initially interested in sports psychology, of course. And so now things have come full circle, and I work with a lot of riders as well as other athletes, and also have a clinical practice. But it's always nice to come back to my roots like I'm doing tonight. So let's get into, there we go. Okay. So starting with the first question being that, do I have to go through this? And whoops. Yeah, we'll ask that again. Do I have to go through this? That is a question that I hear a lot. And the answer to that is yes and no. So yes, in the sense that the activation of our sympathetic nervous system when we are performing is a normal and needed part of what happens for an athlete. And know that you don't have to suffer with the kind of nerves that this rider may be experiencing. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. So back to the yes part of this needs to happen in terms of having performance anxiety, because you feel this way for a good reason. Basically, we have two brains. And the part that gets activated with the sympathetic nervous system for performers, some people refer to that as the lizard brain. It's associated with the fight or flight system, and essentially gets turned on when we experience some kind of threat. And that can be physical, and that can be psychological as well. And what we're going to focus on mainly today is the psychological type of threat that comes with being a performer. So unfortunately, there's no getting rid of performance nerves completely, because, well, actually, if you didn't have them, you wouldn't survive very long. And as you'll see, you really do need them in order to bring out your best. So yes, this, the uncomfortableness that you subject yourself to and wonder about, it's just all part of the game. So things that you experience, like increased muscle tension, that simply means that your fight or flight is getting ready for action, or that system is telling you that you need to get ready for action. Other things that happen, your pupils dilate so you can see better. You have an increased respiration rate, so you can take in more oxygen, and an increased heart rate. So more blood is going to the larger muscles in your body associated with fight or flight, so you can survive the situation. There's an sometimes urgent need for the bathroom, and that is, again, just a normal process of the body wanting to evacuate in order to be lighter and be more able to face the challenge. Our digestion actually starts to shut down, and that is what causes that uneasy, crampy, sometimes nauseous feeling that performers get, that they call butterflies in your stomach. And the blood rushes to your arms and legs, of course, for easier activation, like whether you're going to fight the situation or flee the situation. So all of this is very normal. Of course, when this escalates to the point of you have a lot of different symptoms going on, then yes, then it starts to interfere with your performance, literally your ability to think and your ability to use your skills the way that you can at home in training. So the way that performance nerves build and get out of control for us has to do with a feedback loop between our thoughts, our feelings and sensations, and our behavior. And then in terms of horse sport, and this is what makes horse sport a little bit more challenging when we talk about performance nerves, is that there can be a small to a large impact on your teammate, of course. So you can start with, a single negative thought about, like, I'm scared, I don't think I'm good enough. This gives rise to feelings and sensations in your body. So maybe you start to notice that your heart is beating faster, that you're breathing more shallowly, and that your tension is up. And where that goes next is it does influence our behavior. And this is where a lot of people don't tend to, I find, think enough about how their behavior changes when they're under performance stress. But again, when we talk about horse sport, this is a very important element we need to remember, because, and we'll get more into this later, but when you're talking about behavior, you're talking about your riding behavior changing. And so that is another way that your horse becomes influenced by your performance nerves. So as you can see with all the arrows going in all kinds of different directions, you can have a feedback loop where your horse starts to become part of the mix. And it's easy to see how this loop can turn into something that gets out of control. Okay, so the first step in starting to deal with your performance nerves is really name it to tame it. So, and that means getting specific about what is your threat. And some of the common performance fears are thoughts of failure and embarrassment, of course, worrying about what others think, concern about letting someone down, making mistakes, or trying to be perfect. So you might see something here that looks familiar to you in terms of what your threat or threats are, because many people have more than one, and that is okay and perfectly normal as well. But it is important, if you're going to start managing your performance nerves in a different way, to really understand what you're dealing with, and not just to say, well, I don't perform well under pressure, and yeah, I have performance nerves. You need to know what activates those performance nerves, because remember, fight or flight system, that sympathetic nervous system, is reacting to the presence of some kind of threat. And under circumstances where a performer, a rider, is managing that threat effectively, that means that the level of performance nerves are going to lend that energy that's needed for a sharp focus and making bringing that ride together. And of course, when it gets out of control, that's when things more so start to influence our horse and, like I said, our ability to deliver what we know we can do skill-wise, what we've done in training. So really, really important to kind of dig deep and ask yourself, like, what really triggers my performance anxiety? And then tonight we're going to talk about, to reduce your threat, there's 3 different ways you can approach this. And this, as you'll see, relates back to our feedback loop. So one is to work with your perspective. So that's on the level of your thoughts. The next is to work with your nervous system. So the way that your body changes and physiologically the sensations that you experience. And thirdly, to work with your riding behavior. So as I said, this all relates back to the loop that we just looked at. These things interact with each other. And so knowing how you might be able to intervene in all areas can give you a boost in terms of managing your performance anxiety. As I find a lot of people, and actually in the in surveys that I've done, a lot of people seem to mainly use things like trying to change their thoughts or deep breathing, visualization, but there's a lot more that you can do if you look into these 3 separate categories. And I want to give you an idea of that tonight. So, because what we're looking to do here, of course, is to interrupt negative loops that you get into with your performance anxiety, and also to create new ones, right? You want to know how to step into and connect with a positive loop. So that's where your thoughts about and your perception of the situation is that it's challenging, but that you have prepared for it. So your thoughts tend to be geared toward, what do you need to do to get the job done? And the feelings and sensations that go with that, again, you're going to experience some of that sympathetic action in your body, the increase in respiration rate, all of those things. But that is going to be associated instead with excitement and help you with being alert enough and sharp enough to deliver the kind of performance that you want. And that leads to behavior as a rider where you are able to be present and consistent with your communication, so that your horse in this scenario is responsive and feels secure, because there is consistent and present communication. Whereas when you are in the loop of performance anxiety getting out of hand, like we talked about, that tends to sort of debilitate you from your ability to connect with and communicate with your horse the way you normally would. And as we all know, this horse sport is 100% about the relationship and making sure that relationship is in a place to be able to execute the goal that you wish to. So yes, the horse factor in this case is really, really important. And some horses, of course, react more than others to performance nerves and the changes in your body, and some don't react as much, and they're just as individual as we are in terms of their personalities and their experience with with feeling nervous themselves, and they're of course fight or flight prey animals themselves. So looking at this first category of changing your perception. So we're talking about shrinking your sense of threat by taking a look at what your perception is of what you're facing in the ring. So a lot of people will get into struggling with their thoughts, I find, and thinking that if they can just think positively enough, if they can get into can-do thinking, if they can boost themselves up, that is going to change their perception. And for anybody that's tried to change their negative thoughts out there, you probably know it's a very difficult endeavor, and that sometimes what you end up with is actually being in conflict with your thoughts. Because, for example, if you say, well, you know, I can do this, I'm ready, and that voice, and you have doubt voice that back in the back of your head says, well, yeah, remember what you did in that lesson last Tuesday, and starts pulling you into a different track. The thing is with thoughts is that as soon as you try to change one into a positive thought, you've got 6 other negative ones coming along. And that in itself can be a loop that you can get into. So what I find people have more success with is looking at their perception and trying to change that. And there's 3 different ways we'll talk about. So one is to check your goal. And I put, you know, a goal is not to not humiliate yourself is not a goal, because that is a goal that I've actually heard from people quite a lot when they talk about what is their next goal for their next show. So your goal needs to be something that you feel that you can manage, that you can do. And this is where process goals come in handy as a threat shrinker, because if you can develop some process goals that you are working on in the ring, so something like, you know, I want to work on the consistency of my pace, or I want to work on better use of my corners, or more consistent connection, then that is something that you can do. It's something within your control. And whenever we present ourselves with a goal like that, it feels a lot more, it feels doable, and it feels calming. And in contrast to goals like I need to place in this class, goals that are outcomes typically do tend to up your performance anxiety, and that's simply because it is a goal that we don't have complete control over. So, and checking your goal also means that you don't have in the back of your mind a negative goal like, yes, my goal is to not humiliate myself or not to fall off, for example, because that is going to stay. If that's stuck in the back of your mind, then that's absolutely going to influence your physiology, right? It's going to activate the fight or flight, the feeling of threat. And that's the way that's one way that performance nerves can start to grow. So checking your goals, really important. Checking your skills as well. So for whatever competitive level you are involved in, do you have what you need? And I find it helpful to make a list of what you think is required for competing at that level, so that you can check with it and reassure yourself that you do have everything that you need in order to perform successfully. And that is something that you can also keep adding to, right? And take a look at if you are moving up a level in terms of your in terms of competition. So checking your skills is important. And then finally, checking your language. So instead of looking at what you're about to do as a threat, you can start to encourage yourself to look at it as a challenge or a puzzle. And all of the training that you do at home is essentially homework for and preparation for solving that puzzle. And those are all the skills that you're bringing together on that day. So if you can start to think in terms of, you know, I'm going to problem solve this. I can't wait to figure out this challenge. Then again, that kind of language is not going to elevate your fight or flight system. It's going to instead, again, feel like something that is challenging and exciting, but that you can do. So that is working on the level of perception. When you're now working on the level of your nervous system, so your nervous system, of course, is what is responding to the threat. And if you're at the first sign of any performance nerve, so you notice, you know, I'm breathing more heavily, and you know, my hands are kind of tingling, or I'm experiencing a lot of muscle tension in my shoulders. If the first recognition of those kinds of symptoms, physical symptoms, you start to panic and say, well, you know, I'm getting nervous, and that means that I can't perform, and here it comes again. And that leads you again into a loop of focusing on the symptoms and leading to more negative thoughts and getting you, essentially embroiled in that loop. But if at the first sign of these physiological changes, which again are very, very normal when it comes to performing, you learn to say thank you, then again, that's going to tone down the threat you feel. So if you can regard those physiological changes as, yes, thank you for the energy, thanks for reminding me I do care, or even I am transforming into my super horse show me, and that's awesome. So looking at those challenges as positive, you can come up with whatever message you like of gratitude or thankfulness for this activation that's taking place. And that can be something that can start to help that loop go in the direction, again, that you want it to. Other ways that you can work with your nervous system is to visualize yourself in the show environment. And this doesn't just mean visualizing your performance, but literally visualizing yourself in a show environment, feeling confident, taking in the scene, being able to take in the energy of the show environment and the newness. This can help your nervous system better prepare for a show environment. And the other way is to practice something that's called orienting. And orienting is basically allowing your nervous system a chance to get acclimatized to where it is. So simply this looks like when you get to a show, that when you're walking around with your horse or without, that you look around your environment and you allow yourself to take in where things are, and just all of the different aspects of your environment. And what that can do is just really help your nervous system settle into this new place. And it might sound simple, but this can be a very effective way, actually, of starting your day, your show. It's definitely something that I used to do when I was competing, is to deliberately go take a walk around the showgrounds, make sure I knew where everything was, and just let my system settle into this new place. And that can do a lot, again, to just reassure your nervous system that you're able to manage this and it's not a threat. So that are some things that will help you work on the level of your nervous system. Then there is working with your riding behaviors. And I think I'm pretty sure most of you would agree that when you are in that zone of having an excessive amount of performance anxiety, that it does change your ride. It changes the way that you apply your aids. It changes essentially your riding behavior. So, and you can correspond this to the fight or flight system. And it's actually there's a typo there. It's flight, fight, or freeze that we go through, right? So when we're faced with a threat, some people tend to go in the direction of feeling that flight sensation. And these are riders who might change into the riding behavior of rushing things too much and just wanting to get out of the ring, out of the environment, because they're so uncomfortable. And their physiology is also propelling them literally to do that. And it results in this change in their ride. Fight. So sometimes riders that err more on the side of going towards this direction in terms of responding to a threat literally start to fight more, or what some coaches would say, get far too busy with their horses and be micromanaging or pulling. So, and then finally, there are people who do freeze. And so these are people whose riding behavior will turn into anywhere from a combination of just taking off certain aids because they literally are in that moment not sure what to do, or getting to that point of feeling like they just want to give up and they kind of stop their ride altogether. And obviously that leads to a lot of confusion in terms of their horse. So getting to know what your tendencies are in terms of how your ride changes under pressure can help you then be more mindful of, okay, if I know that I'm the type of rider, for example, actually I just worked with a rider recently whose main response was freeze. And so for her, this did result in her taking off her aids at inappropriate times, and she rode a lot differently in competition than she did at home. And one of the things that she really had to work at was to actually increase her activation level in a positive way before while she was at a show. So in the warm-up ring, she had to make sure that she kind of pumped up that energy so that it combated that, or it counteracted, that tendency for her to go into those freeze behaviors. So if you know them, again, if you study yourself and you get aware of how your riding behavior changes, then you have more of a chance of putting into place some counteracting measures that can, again, help that loop start to go in a more positive direction. So yes, you need to identify what your tendency is to do in response to those triggers of performance anxiety, and that gets back to knowing what your threat is. So what are the types of things that tend to wind you up into that, or wind up your nervous system, and yes, and then be able to know how you are going to, what you're going to draw your attention to in terms of making that ride more effective, making it look more like you would what you would do basically at home in training. So then you get to the point where in this process that you need to create a pre-performance goal. And I say pre-performance goal before pre-performance routine, because you have to know what it is that you are going for, right? So what do you want yourself and your team? How do you need to show up essentially at the in-gate? So do you need a, as I was talking about the last ride, do you need a certain amount of more activation in your body? Do you need to up your energy level? What does your horse need in terms of being focused and being attentive and connected to you? So what kinds of things does your horse need? And so you need to identify that pre-performance goal, like I said, how you want to show up at the in-gate before you can say, okay, I'm going to now develop a way of a routine that helps me get to that goal. And that's where you are utilizing some of the skills that we talked about. You might bring in other things like visualization or things like music to influence the direction of your activation. But you really need to know like where you want to, as I said, be when you're standing at that in-gate. And that pre-performance routine then needs to be trained, right? So it needs to be tested out. So whether that's in mock shows or that's even in lessons where you challenge or you deliberately apply that routine and see where it, right, how it's working for you. So it needs to be trained, but it also needs to be freshened up from time to time. So one pre-performance routine for one show might not exactly be what you need for the next show if your circumstances have changed in any way. So it also needs to meet your current needs and your current horse's needs to be effective. Another way you can approach this is not to necessarily use a routine, but to use a pre-check. So, and one that I talk about a lot with riders and other athletes is called what's in your bag. And so essentially before you start your warm up, your ride, you sort of need to give yourself like a spot where you're going to check in with yourself before you start. And you're going to go through, okay, checking on your body. So where is it at today? Are you feeling tense, relaxed? How much activation are you feeling? Do you need to make a shift in that particular area? Attitude. So attitude, perception. How are you feeling about the challenge that you're about to approach today? Do you need to make, and once you become aware of that, then do you need to shift that in a different direction? And G is for goal. So what is the purpose for your ride? Do you have a clear idea of what you would like to get accomplished today? And there we go back to linking into the process goals to, one or two things that are the things that you've been working at home in training to achieve the training results that you need or want to replicate in the ring. So getting very clear about what those one or two things are before you set off into the warm-up ring. So there are different ways to approach the pre-performance moment. But you do need to have that pre-performance goal in mind, so where you would like to end up. but you can either construct a simple routine for yourself that helps you get there, and everybody is very individual in that respect, and you really have to play with it. Or you can go with a simple pre-check like this, where you're really asking yourself to check in on those different in those different places that you know are going to impact your performance and also impact the level of performance anxiety that you're likely to experience. So it gives you a chance to shift into something different. So with performing, just loop back to the beginning, we have two brains that we need to contend with, two brains and one ride. And the best ride involves working with both of these. So understanding the physiological change that goes along with performing, so that sympathetic activation and how it shows up in you and what kinds of symptoms are most disrupting to you that maybe you need to work with or on. And then using that thinking part of your brain to apply different strategies and different tools to help you navigate that performance experience. So there's no getting rid of, unfortunately, our fight or flight brain sort of having some kind of horrific brain surgery that I know you don't want to have. And it does help us survive, so we need it. So the best route is to know that you're going to have some of that going on, and to meet that with your thinking brain and with tools and strategies that are going to help you, as I said, either interrupt a negative performance anxiety loop when you get into it, or being able to get yourself in the first place into a positive performance loop. And that is where your pre-performance preparation comes in. So by becoming a student of your performance anxiety, and I often talk about this or refer to it as becoming a student of your sport and becoming a student of yourself. And what I mean by that is really bringing awareness to you, to how this impacts you and impacts the teammate that you happen to be working with at the time. So entering this process with an attitude of curiosity, and that you really want to get to know instead of avoid how your performance anxiety impacts you and your teammate. And so by doing this and constructing a plan to help yourself get through it, then a great thing does start to happen. And that is as you start to turn the tables on your stress response and become braver. Because whenever we take charge of something, whenever we form an action plan, in itself, we are already dissipating our performance anxiety. We're starting to meet it head on and say, I can meet this challenge. I can do this, instead of avoiding, which definitely has a tendency to have us wind up into that loop of feeling more anxiety because we don't know exactly, the kinds of perception we're having on our performance. We want to ignore all these horrible sensations that we're having. And it might feel good for a short while to get into that avoidance, but ultimately, it's going to, whether you avoid it or not, it's going to influence your performance. So the best, the first and the foremost thing that you need to bring to this is the awareness of yourself and how you operate, and develop things that work specifically for you. And that means some experimentation. Okay, so I wanted to leave more time this time for questions because we had a lot of questions last time. I just wanted to tell you quickly that there are 2 more online courses, one of which is Performing Under Pressure, which gets into more detail about each of those 3 areas that I talked about, and also mindfulness applied to riding, so mindful riding. And that I will get Jessica to send you a coupon code for those when they come out in about a week or so. But let's get to some questions, because I know that you have some specific questions as related to your personal situation. So Jessica, maybe you'd like to, are there some common questions that are popping up, or are we going to do sort of the hands up?
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but I have one for myself.
Okay.
So as a coach for, like, if you have students who are very nervous, what sort of things would I, like, let's say they're sort of towing the line of like just general nervousness or getting to the point of like not being able to function. How would you sort of gauge that and then help them either through it or make a good decision of, say, if they're so nervous about a cross-country course or like the course they're going to ride, how would you gauge helping them through it or being like, no, this isn't for you today? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of 2 questions in there, and one has to do with like, is there a time when you would want to be able to recognize that this person was not able to complete the task at hand because their performance anxiety had gotten out of control? And I think coaches are you know, it's usually pretty obvious when it's gotten to that point of, because there's things happening in the warm-up ring, there's starting to be concerns about safety, I would say, that would need to be addressed. Now, hopefully not too many people do get to that point. You're definitely going to have people who are on the higher end of performance anxiety. And if you're looking to help bring someone out of that, then things like redirecting them to doing really specific things, again, with in the warm-up ring with their horse that they're familiar with. So anything that you can do to help them come out of their head and back into their horse and into the task is helpful. Actually, I just heard a coach commenting during the Olympics about a skier that he was working with and has worked with for a long time. So they have a relationship where he knows this athlete very well, and he has started to be able to see signs in this person of them getting into that zone of being too anxious. And this coach said, so what he routinely does is he will dial down the stress by talking to this person about their cats, because they both have a cat, or about something else that's going on in their life. So he will steer the conversation for a bit away from the competitive pressure, and or sometimes he would use lightness, humor, to bring this person back into the present. Because one thing that definitely suffers when you're on the high end of performance anxiety is that you've lost presence with your horse. You're in your head with the scary thoughts. You're thinking about the scary sensations that are going on in your body. And so helping that person reconnect literally with the present as I said, by giving them a task, or by, even by, doing something with like just touching their horse in a certain way. So yeah, it's essentially, how can I bring this person out of their head and back into the moment and back into feeling their horse and connecting with the task, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely does make sense. And I feel like probably focusing on the things that they can do, like their skills that they have to handle all the situations coming up, to like draw them out of the things that they're thinking about. Oh, this could happen, that could happen, etc. Would also be a good thing too.
Just exactly. Absolutely. Drawing their attention back to execution and to things that they have done at home in training to prepare for this, because that will reconnect them with, right? I have been, I am prepared. I have been preparing for this at home, and this is how this transfers into this competitive environment.
Awesome. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment. Does anybody want to
pop up?
Pop up? Yeah, pop on and ask a question. Yes, no. We had a lot last time.
Yeah, we had so many that I tried to make the PowerPoint a little shorter so we could get into some juicy questions, but it's always different. Oh, do we have a few starting?
Yeah, do you see them, or do you want me to read them up for you?
Let's see if I can.
Yeah, Dawn asks, when is a good time to ask a rider to identify their issues or a specific fear?
So I think that is at home, that's a conversation to have at home in training. And there's like, that should be introduced right away. And that's the thing about approaching performance anxiety as a normal part of competing. It's something that that everyone will experience, and especially when and will change over time, of course, too, in terms of what that specific fear is. But if you don't identify that and deal with that head on, then that means that that person is going to be going into a competitive environment, not to an extent, not having prepared, right? So the more that you can identify and be specific about what those fears are, and then talk about, okay, that's how we're, here's some ways we're going to work on shrinking that fear and dealing with that fear in the competitive environment, then it's just going to be another layer that helps that person feel prepared to meet the challenge.
Would it be a good thing, like, let's say if it's a coach with riders in a lesson, to ask, is there something about this that makes you nervous, or is there something you're worried about, or do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, I think, again, normalizing that as, to present it as we all have performance type fears, and of course those show up in lessons, and talking about the kind of that common list I went through, and just saying, here are some things people worry about them in lessons, worry about them in a competitive environment, normalizing that we all have them. Again, it can ease, right, that stress of a lot of times people feel like they have to hide those performance fears, because if they have them, then, they're showing weakness or they're not confident enough. And so to really normalize them as, nope, like we're all dealing with this. These are things that every rider has to figure out how to deal with. And some of them are going to be bigger than others, but we're kind of all in this together.
Perfect. Thank you. Michelle asks, can you speak about how your horse reacts to your own sense of anxiety and how that can cause additional issues?
Yes. So, and I think that's the ultimate challenge of horse sport is that, again, when you get into the higher, experiencing the higher degrees of performance anxiety, that chances are that your horse is going to react in some way. So this is, again, speaking to this at home and training when, and what actually one way you can do this is to have every once in a while to have high intensity days. So that would be a lesson where you surprise them with something challenging, but of course within their skill set. And afterwards you have a debrief. So, and then it gives you the opportunity to talk about, the performance fears, and also, okay, what did you notice in terms of how your horse tends to respond to your performance nerves? I did a interview with Ian Miller quite a while ago, and he was really good about being able to identify how each of his horses responded to competitive environments, and not necessarily to his own performance nerves, but to environments, and how he needed to approach that horse, even with his perception of the event. So if he had a very green horse, and then he would think thoughts about, this is just another day and we're doing things at home like we do them in training, so that he could transmit that through his ride, and hopefully into the kind of energy he was transmitting to his horse. But that is, something that's so variable that, again, I think it's a good thing to bring up with students when you're home, and to be aware of yourself, so that you can start to experiment with different ways of approaching that change.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense, for sure. Erin made a comment. She said, the best advice I ever got was from Robin Hahn, telling me I was normal to be nervous, which made it seem part of what was supposed to happen. He also said to use it to keep you sharp.
Yes. So, and that's where I think if you can catch the beginning, like the sensations that occur for you when you're starting to experience the performance anxiety, if you can catch those and, like I said, be grateful for it, thank them essentially for showing up, thank that energy for showing up to help keep you sharp, that is something that can make a big difference actually in starting off that positive loop, right? And stepping into that. So yes, I remember Robin, and awesome advice.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's definitely normal to feel those things, and it's part of the coach's job to make us not feel bad for it, but tell us how to use it. And I
think if we regard it as a normal part of the game, so to speak, and so we talk about it, we
acknowledge it,
exactly, then that sends a message, right? A calming message.
Definitely. Awesome. The next question is, do you have ideas for in the moment quick fixes for you or at the in gate or breathing exercises, etc.?
Yeah, so quick fixes, there's a lot of different things that, again, you could experiment with. The thing I would say about breathing exercises is that if it's not something that you have rehearsed very well, then drawing your attention to your breath and to the sensations in your body might cause more panic than it does help you. So in terms of quick fixes, try to stay away from things that, again, if you haven't really trained that skill very well, to stay away from, right, connecting too much with your body at the last moment before the in-gate. But I guess probably my favorite kind of quick fix or is about doing something, like I said earlier, to help your focus come out of your head and back into the present moment. So you can do this by, standing up in your stirrups and literally just feeling the weight of your heels. You can move your body so that you can feel that movement, so you can help yourself get back into your body. You can do, there is an exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is, what are 5 things that you can see in your environment right now, but you can shorten this down. So looking at some things and just some things that are neutral and describing them to yourself. Some things that you can feel. So that again gets back to, what does my horse's mane feel like right now? Or what does the weight feel like in my stirrups? Or what does it feel like if I shift my shoulders back? So doing something to connect with your body and to connect with the present moment.
Excellent. Awesome. Thanks, April. Kelly had a question. How do you approach fear related to previous accidents on horseback at the show or not? I've seen people with this situational fear and have also dealt with it myself.
So physical fear is a little bit different than performance anxiety. Of course, you can have both at the same time. But when you have fear that's lingering due to a previous accident, then again, this is where you need to sort of dig deeper and really understand what that specific fear is, so that you can then help that student rebuild their confidence. So, it could be things like just increasing certain skills, or bringing them back in touch with certain skills. It could be doing more visualization work, looking at old video where that person was performing effectively to get them back in touch with their skills. Because the thing about accidents, and that's is that they do disrupt your sense of safety, right? So we all have this certain degree of safety that we feel in certain situations, and when you come to an accident that's significant, then that disrupts, naturally, again, it does disrupt your sense of safety. Like, no different than if you've driven your car for 10 years and all of a sudden you have your first accident, and it really rocks you, right? And all of a sudden you might be experiencing fear about getting back in the car, or getting back in traffic. So those kinds of fears need a completely different approach than performance anxiety, because people really need to gradually rebuild their confidence from that accident. And that kind of looks different for everyone. One of the online courses that I have up right now is Riding Through Your Fear. And that course actually deals very specifically with identifying what the fear is, coming up with a gradual plan to help yourself, and you can adapt it to helping a student rebuild their confidence and be able to place themselves back in those situations eventually.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks, April. I'm not seeing any other questions right at the moment. So I guess if anybody else has anything else, we'll just give them a minute to type it or pop on if they'd like to ask it in person. And just while we're waiting for that, I'd just like to thank Kathleen Ziegler again for organizing these webinars. And again to April for her expertise and taking time out of her day for answering our questions and putting this together for us. And also to the Alberta Horse Trials Association for sponsoring these awesome webinars. We've had a great turnout for all of them so far. And our next one actually is going to be on March 16th. It will be care and maintenance of the aging event horse with Dr. Sarah Peterson, who is a sports medicine veterinarian. If you guys want to keep an eye out for that. Yeah, I don't see any other questions at the moment. I don't have any myself. So if April, you wanted to just say a little bit to wrap up, or?
Oh, I think there's
maybe
some more coming in.
Yeah, they're coming in. No, that's perfect.
So any basic off-horse pre-performance ideas? Well, one thing I routinely do when I'm working with someone one-on-one is we will make a chart of when your performance anxiety usually starts. So for some people, this is like a week out, or it's the night before, or it's the morning of. And then we kind of fill out this chart with, okay, so what are you usually doing in response to how you're feeling? And again, that gives us a good idea of, now we can see where the loop starts to gain some speed, right? And so in terms of pre-performance off-horse ideas, that's where this comes in, is that, so you're looking at more than just show day, you're looking at, okay, if my anxiety starts a week out, then how am I going to be managing that while I'm at home? Or if it starts the night before and I have trouble sleeping, then what are some things that I can do to mitigate that and get a better night's sleep? Because and often just honestly doing that exercise of kind of, being honest with how those kind of sections are looking and the behaviors and the things that you tend to be doing is really eye-opening, and you'll be able to see how that loop really starts to form and how you can start to interrupt it. So I guess getting back to the basic off-horse pre-performance ideas, there are lots of things that you can do, like for example, when you're tacking up, if that is a time when your performance, things start to come into your mind, etc., that you're going to have a very specific plan of, let's say, getting into an exercise of grounding with your horse where you're doing some really mindful grooming and you are paying attention to how your horse is doing that day. That's your goal for the tack up period, and that's what you're going to anchor your mind into. So that's what you're looking for with the off horse things. Is you're looking for awareness of what you do that is not helping your loop be very positive, and you are identifying some alternate anchors of what you can keep your mind engaged in during that time so that you're not adding to that performance anxiety buildup.
Perfect.
I think there's another one.
Yeah, if someone's nerves makes it difficult to remember tests or courses, what would be the recommended course of action?
Yeah, so if you have a tendency to go off course or remember or make errors and patterns and this kind of thing, then really you need to set up, for one thing, more opportunities, more high intensity days at home where you can challenge that. So instead of waiting for all of that activation to happen when that person gets to a show, you need to, unfortunately, not avoid it and immerse yourself in those challenging situations at home, so you can start to try out different ways of staying of recalling or staying with your plan with I guess what I'm trying to say is that that kind of problem is really, again, best tested out at home under conditions which are going to replicate the anxiety and allow you to help that person work through that problem, such that they can learn that they can have a certain amount of nerves and they can remember, they can function in that environment. And that does go a long way, honestly, to when you get to a show. If you start to learn, yeah, I can feel nervous, but I can still bring myself back to this particular strategy for memorization, or I can bring myself back to my plan, then when they feel nervous at a show, it's not going to be this kind of like crater response, like I can't do anything. So that's a long-winded way, sorry, of saying that. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think it's an amount of like experimenting for yourself, like whether it's jump 1, 2, 3, pink, blue, yellow, double, triple, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And as a coach, you can help somebody work through that when they are experiencing that performance anxiety, and literally experiment with different ways, and then they're going to walk into that competitive environment having tested out some different ways, have found their way, hopefully, to a particular strategy that they felt worked for them. And that's just another, right, again, confidence boost.
Definitely. Awesome. All right. So I just see a few, like, thank you for an excellent presentation. This is wonderful. And she looks forward to the other webinars and courses. Yeah.
Yeah, bring on spring. I totally
yes. I feel that as well.
Especially where we are in Alberta today. I guess it's probably pretty different in Texas.
Yeah, The last couple of days have not been great. But awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jessica, for your organization skills and running things, and Kathleen, and to the AHTA to having me back again. And I hope to see you guys again with a new topic. And yeah, just to throw that out there, something that maybe we can think about doing is actually one on physical fear and coping with that.
Yeah, that would be amazing, because we got a lot of questions about that on your last webinar as well. So yeah, no, awesome. Thank you so much, April, for all of your insight, and like, this has been really, really great.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I guess if we're all done, thank you for everybody for attending. Thanks again to Kathleen, April, HTA, and we'll see you guys in the next one. All right, thanks so much. Bye.